The broken pipe under Ben Carter's kitchen sink had been dripping for 3 days, but at 42, fixing things alone after Tommy went to bed had become his ritual. The beam from Rebecca's old flashlight flickered weakly as he worked, casting shadows across the cramped kitchen of their Millbrook home. When the knock came at 11:15 p.m., sharp and deliberate, Ben's blood ran cold. 2 identical girls stood in the pouring rain, 12 years old with dark hair plastered to their faces. Their clothes were soaked but clearly expensive. Designer jackets, leather boots. The taller one, Zoe, spoke with an eerie composure that made Ben's skin crawl. "Excuse me, sir. We need somewhere to stay tonight. We can pay you." Her sister Maya clutched a designer backpack, trembling not from cold, but from something else entirely. Ben stared at these strange children who had materialized from the storm like ghosts. Then Maya whispered something that made his heart stop. She knew his name. Ben's hands trembled as he set Rebecca's flashlight on the kitchen counter, its dying beam casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. The 2 girls stood in his doorway like mirror images of each other, water dripping from their expensive clothes onto his threadbare welcome mat. Their eyes held a strange mixture of desperation and calculation that no 12-year-old should possess. Zoe's voice cut through the sound of rain hammering against the windows. "We're sorry to disturb you so late, Mr. Carter. We just need somewhere warm and dry until morning." The formal way she spoke, the careful pronunciation of each word, sent chills down Ben's spine. Maya stepped closer to her sister, her designer sneakers squelching against the wet porch boards. Ben's mind raced as he studied these unexpected visitors. His 10-year-old son Tommy was fast asleep upstairs, and the last thing he wanted was to wake the boy with strangers at their door. The girls looked harmless enough, but something about their presence felt orchestrated, as if they had been watching his house and waiting for the right moment to approach. Rebecca had always told him to trust his instincts about people, and right now every instinct screamed that these children were not what they seemed. Yet the rain was getting heavier, and he couldn't bring himself to turn away 2 young girls in the middle of a storm. He stepped back and gestured for them to enter. "Come in before you catch pneumonia." The girls moved through his living room with an odd familiarity, as if they had been there before. Maya's eyes darted to the family photos on the mantelpiece, lingering on a picture of Rebecca holding baby Tommy. Zoe examined the furniture with the appraising gaze of someone much older than her years. Ben grabbed 2 towels from the linen closet and handed them over, watching as the girls dried themselves with practiced efficiency. Their movements were synchronized in a way that suggested years of shared experiences, but there was something else beneath their coordinated actions. Fear, real bone-deep terror that they were trying desperately to hide behind their polite facades. Ben cleared his throat. "Where are your parents?" Zoe's grip tightened on her towel as she exchanged a meaningful look with her sister. "They're busy tonight. We just need a place to stay until they can come get us." The lie came smoothly, rehearsed and polished like a performance they had given before. Maya fidgeted with the zipper of her backpack, her fingers working nervously at the expensive metal hardware. Ben noticed the subtle designer labels on their clothes, the quality of their shoes, the way they carried themselves with an unconscious privilege that spoke of money and status. These weren't runaway kids from broken homes. These were children from wealth who had ended up on his doorstep for reasons he couldn't begin to understand. The question that haunted him was simple. Why his house? As Ben led them upstairs to the guest room, he caught Maya whispering to her sister in what sounded like French or Italian. The words were too quiet to make out, but the urgency in her voice was unmistakable. Zoe responded with a sharp shake of her head and a warning look that silenced Maya immediately. The interaction lasted only seconds, but it confirmed Ben's growing suspicion that these girls were keeping secrets that went far deeper than a simple need for shelter. He opened the door to the small guest room, which still smelled faintly of the lavender sachets Rebecca had placed in the dresser drawers years ago. The girls surveyed the space with the same calculating attention they had given his living room. Something was very wrong with this picture. Ben woke to the smell of pancakes and coffee drifting up from the kitchen, scents that had been absent from his house for the 2 years since Rebecca's death. He descended the stairs cautiously, expecting to find the guest room empty and his unexpected visitors gone like a strange dream. Instead, he discovered Zoe standing at his stove, expertly flipping pancakes while Maya set the table with his good china. The plates and silverware were arranged with hotel-like precision, and she had somehow found the cloth napkins Rebecca used to save for special occasions. Tommy sat at the breakfast table, already dressed for school, and chatting animatedly with Maya about his favorite video games. The scene was so domestic, so perfectly normal, that it made Ben's skin crawl. These girls moved through his kitchen like they belonged there. The most unsettling part was how naturally Tommy had accepted their presence. His shy, cautious son, who normally took weeks to warm up to new people, was laughing and joking with Maya as if they had been friends for years. Zoe glanced up from the stove and smiled at Ben with the kind of practiced charm that belonged on a politician's daughter, not a 12-year-old girl. "Good morning, Mr. Carter. We hope you don't mind that we made breakfast. We wanted to thank you for your kindness last night." She gestured to the plate of perfectly golden pancakes, the fresh coffee steaming in his favorite mug, the way she had arranged everything just the way Rebecca used to do. The similarity was too precise to be coincidental. These girls knew things about his family that strangers shouldn't know. Ben accepted the coffee with hands that weren't quite steady, studying the girls over the rim of his mug. Maya had found Tommy's favorite cartoon character plates in the back of the cabinet, dishes that Ben himself hadn't used since Rebecca's funeral. Zoe moved around his kitchen with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where everything belonged, opening drawers and cabinets without hesitation. When the smoke alarm began beeping because of steam from the pancakes, both girls reacted instantly. Maya reached for the right cabinet and produced a step stool, while Zoe climbed up and pressed the correct button to silence the alarm. The entire sequence took less than 10 seconds and required no communication between them. They had done this before, in this kitchen, with that specific smoke alarm. But that was impossible. After Tommy left for school, chattering excitedly about his new friends and extracting promises that they would still be there when he got home, Ben sat across from the girls at his kitchen table. The morning sunlight streaming through the windows revealed details he had missed in the darkness and chaos of the previous night. Maya's backpack bore the logo of an exclusive private school in Philadelphia, one that charged more per year than Ben made in 2. Zoe's watch was a delicate piece of jewelry that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. Their hair, now dry, had been professionally cut and styled. Everything about these children screamed money and privilege, which made their presence in his modest Millbrook home even more mysterious. He leaned forward, studying their faces. "I need you to tell me the truth. Who are you, and why are you really here?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Ben watched as the girls' carefully constructed facades began to show hairline cracks. Maya's lower lip trembled slightly before she caught herself and pressed her mouth into a thin line. Zoe's hands, which had been folded primly in her lap, clenched into small fists. For a moment, they looked exactly like what they were: 2 frightened children who had run out of places to hide. Then Zoe's mask slipped back into place, and she met Ben's gaze with surprising directness. "We're exactly what we told you, Mr. Carter. 2 girls who needed help, and you were kind enough to provide it." But her voice lacked the smooth confidence of her previous lies, and Ben caught the slight emphasis she placed on the word "exactly." There was a message hidden in her words, a clue she was trying to give him without alerting her sister. The rest of the morning passed in a strange dance of normalcy and tension. The girls helped Ben with household chores, displaying an unsettling knowledge of his routines and preferences. Maya knew without being told that he kept the cleaning supplies under the bathroom sink. Zoe automatically sorted his laundry the way Rebecca used to, separating colors and delicates with practiced efficiency. When Ben started to repair a dripping faucet in the guest bathroom, both girls appeared at his elbow with tools he hadn't asked for, but definitely needed. Maya handed him a wrench of exactly the right size, while Zoe held his flashlight at the perfect angle to illuminate his work. Their assistance was seamless and intuitive, as if they had helped him with similar repairs dozens of times before. The feeling of déjà vu was so strong it made Ben's head spin. By afternoon, Ben found himself almost forgetting the mysterious circumstances of their arrival. The girls were polite, helpful, and surprisingly good company. Maya had a gentle sense of humor that reminded him painfully of Rebecca, while Zoe possessed a sharp intelligence that kept him on his toes during their conversations. They seemed genuinely interested in his work as a plumber, asking thoughtful questions about pipe systems and water pressure that most adults wouldn't think to pose. When he mentioned that he was struggling to diagnose a problem with his truck's heating system, Zoe immediately suggested checking the thermostat housing for a coolant leak. Her suggestion turned out to be exactly right, saving him what would have been an expensive trip to the mechanic. The more time he spent with them, the more convinced he became that these were no ordinary children. As evening approached and Tommy returned from school, the house filled with a warmth and energy that had been missing since Rebecca's death. The girls helped Tommy with his homework, patiently explaining math concepts he had been struggling with for weeks. Maya played simple melodies on Rebecca's old piano, songs that made Tommy clap and laugh with delight. Zoe organized a board game tournament that had all three children sprawled across the living room floor, arguing playfully about rules and strategy. Ben watched from the kitchen doorway, coffee mug in hand, feeling something dangerously close to contentment settle over him. For the first time in 2 years, his house felt like a home again. The realization terrified him almost as much as it comforted him. He was getting attached to these mysterious girls, and he still had no idea who they really were. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Ben sat alone in his kitchen with Rebecca's old photo album spread across the table. He flipped through pages of memories, searching for something that might explain the strange familiarity he felt whenever he looked at Zoe and Maya. His wife had been involved in numerous charity organizations and volunteer activities before Tommy was born. Perhaps she had worked with these girls or their family in some capacity. As he turned to a section of photos from Rebecca's volunteer work at various community centers and shelters, his heart nearly stopped. There, in a group photo dated just 2 years earlier, was Rebecca standing behind a table of craft supplies, her arm around two familiar faces, Zoe and Maya, slightly younger, but unmistakably the same children now sleeping in his guest room. The photo caption read, "Summer Art Program for At-Risk Youth, Rebecca Carter with participants." His wife had known these girls. The question was, how much had she known about them? Ben's hands shook as he studied the photograph more closely. Rebecca's expression in the picture was one he remembered well, the look she got when she was particularly fond of someone. Her arm around the girls was protective, almost maternal. Maya was holding up a painting of what looked like a family of 4 standing in front of a small house, while Zoe displayed a clay sculpture of a flashlight. Even 2 years ago, these children had been creating art that somehow connected to his family. The coincidences were piling up too high to ignore. These girls hadn't randomly chosen his house for shelter. They had come here deliberately, seeking him out for reasons that were becoming more mysterious by the hour. Ben closed the photo album and stared at the ceiling, wondering what other secrets Rebecca had kept from him, and why 2 children from her volunteer work had appeared on his doorstep in the middle of a storm. The next morning brought an unexpected phone call that changed everything. Ben had just finished making breakfast when his landline rang with the urgent persistence of bad news. The voice on the other end belonged to Mrs. Henderson, his elderly neighbor who kept watch over the neighborhood with the dedication of a security guard. "Ben, dear, there are some very official-looking people in black cars parked outside your house. They've been there for about 20 minutes, just sitting and watching. I thought you should know." Ben's blood turned to ice as he glanced toward the living room where Zoe and Maya sat with Tommy, working on a jigsaw puzzle of the Pennsylvania countryside. The girls' heads had snapped up at the word cars, and the color had drained from their faces. They knew exactly who was outside his house, and they were terrified. Before Ben could ask Mrs. Henderson for more details, the doorbell rang with the kind of authoritative chime that suggested official business. Through the window, he could see two men in expensive suits standing on his porch, their posture radiating the kind of professional authority that came with badges and legal papers. Behind them, barely visible through the morning fog, sat a black sedan with tinted windows. Zoe grabbed Maya's hand and pulled her towards the back of the house, their breakfast abandoned and their carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "Please," Zoe whispered, her voice breaking with desperation. "Please don't let them take us. We just wanted to see—" She stopped herself before finishing the sentence, but Ben caught the word that mattered most. See, they had come here to see something or someone specific. They had come here to see him. Ben's mind raced as the doorbell rang again, longer and more insistent this time. He had perhaps 30 seconds before the men outside decided to take more aggressive action, and he needed to make a choice that would affect not just his own life, but the lives of two frightened children who had somehow become his responsibility. The smart thing would be to open the door and hand the girls over to whatever authorities had come for them. They clearly came from wealth and privilege, and their families probably had armies of lawyers and private investigators searching for them. But the desperate fear in their eyes reminded him of wounded animals, and something deep in his chest refused to let him betray their trust. These girls had chosen him, had sought him out for reasons connected to Rebecca, and he owed it to his wife's memory to protect them. At least until he understood what they were running from. "Tommy, take your backpack and go to Mrs. Henderson's house," Ben said quietly, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "Tell her you're going to be late for school today." His son looked confused, but obeyed without question, slipping out the back door just as the doorbell gave way to sharp, authoritative knocking. Ben turned to the girls, who were huddled together like refugees from a war zone. "Whatever happens, you two stay upstairs and don't make a sound unless I call for you. Understand?" They nodded in unison, their faces pale but determined. As they disappeared up the staircase, Ben took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and walked to the front door. He had no idea what he was about to face, but he knew with absolute certainty that his quiet life in Millbrook was about to become infinitely more complicated. The man at Ben's door looked like he had stepped out of a government thriller, complete with a black suit, crisp white shirt, and the kind of sunglasses that hid more than they revealed. His partner hung back slightly, speaking quietly into a cell phone while keeping his eyes fixed on the windows of Ben's house. The lead agent displayed a leather credential holder with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Carter, I'm Detective Reynolds with the Philadelphia Police Department. We're investigating a missing persons case, and we have reason to believe you might have information that could help us." His tone was professional, but carried an undertone of suspicion that made Ben's shoulders tense. Behind the detective's polite words lay an accusation. Ben was harboring something or someone he shouldn't be. The question was how much they already knew, and how much they were fishing for. Ben forced his expression into what he hoped looked like confused cooperation, while his mind calculated angles and possibilities. "Missing persons. I'm sorry, Detective, but I'm not sure how I could help you. I'm just a plumber from Millbrook." Reynolds studied Ben's face with the intensity of someone trained to spot lies and evasions. We're looking for two 12-year-old girls who disappeared from their home in Philadelphia 3 days ago, Zoe and Maya Blackwood. Their family is, well, let's just say they have the resources to ensure a very thorough search. The detectives paused before the word resources carried volumes of meaning. These weren't just any missing children. These were children from the kind of family that could mobilize private investigators, offer substantial rewards, and apply pressure at the highest levels of law enforcement. Ben's mouth went dry as he realized the magnitude of what he had walked into. "I haven't seen any children matching that description," Ben said carefully, technically telling the truth since he had never seen the Blackwood girls before they appeared at his door. "But if I do encounter them, I'll certainly contact you immediately." Reynolds nodded slowly, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by Ben's cooperative tone. "The thing is, Mr. Carter, we have reason to believe these girls might specifically seek you out. Their father mentioned that they had been asking questions about someone named Carter in Millbrook, though he couldn't understand why." The detective's words hit Ben like a physical blow. The girls hadn't just randomly chosen his house. They had been planning this, asking about him specifically, preparing for this moment. But how had they even known he existed? And what did they want from him? The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Reynolds asking seemingly casual questions about Ben's work schedule, his family, and whether he had noticed any unusual activity in the neighborhood. Each question felt like a probe, designed to uncover inconsistencies in his story or crack his composure. Ben answered honestly where he could and deflected where he couldn't, all while acutely aware that two terrified children were hiding upstairs, probably listening to every word. Finally, Reynolds handed Ben a business card and stepped back from the door. "If you do see these girls, or if anything unusual happens, please call me immediately. Their family is very worried, and they just want them home safe." The detective's emphasis on the word family carried a subtle threat. "Cross the Blackwoods, and you'll regret it." Ben nodded and closed the door, then leaned against it while his heart hammered against his ribs. When Ben climbed the stairs to check on Zoe and Maya, he found them sitting on the floor of the guest room, clutching each other and crying silently. The masks of composure they had worn since their arrival were completely gone, replaced by the raw fear of children who had been running for days and had finally reached the end of their rope. Maya looked up at him with eyes red from tears. "They're going to make us go back, aren't they?" Her voice was so small and broken that Ben felt something fierce and protective rise in his chest. Zoe wiped her face with the back of her hand and tried to pull herself together. "We're sorry we brought this to your house, Mr. Carter. We never wanted to get you in trouble. We just—" She trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. Ben sat down on the floor beside them, his mind racing with questions he wasn't sure he was ready to ask. "Why don't you want to go home?" Ben asked gently. "Detective Reynolds said your family is worried about you." Zoe and Maya exchanged a look that spoke of shared secrets and painful experiences. Maya was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "Our father isn't a bad man, but he doesn't understand us. He thinks money can fix everything, that if he buys us the right things and sends us to the right schools, we'll be happy. But we're not his real daughters, and he never lets us forget it." Ben's heart clenched at the pain in her voice. Zoe picked up the explanation where her sister left off. "He adopted us 2 years ago after our parents died in a car accident. He's been kind to us, I suppose, but it feels like we're living in a museum. Everything is expensive and perfect and cold. The picture they painted was of privilege without love, security without warmth. So you ran away?" Ben asked, though he already knew the answer. The girls nodded in unison, their synchronized movement speaking of years spent as a unit against the world. Zoe's voice grew stronger as she continued their story. We've been planning this for months. We researched, we saved money, we waited for the right opportunity. We knew exactly where we wanted to go and who we wanted to find." She looked directly at Ben, her eyes holding a mixture of hope and desperation. "We wanted to find you, Mr. Carter. We wanted to meet the husband of the only person who ever made us feel like we belonged somewhere." Ben's world tilted on its axis as the pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into place. These girls hadn't just known Rebecca from a volunteer program. She had been something more to them, something important enough that they had risked everything to find her family. The revelation that Rebecca had played a significant role in these children's lives hit Ben like a physical blow. How had his wife never mentioned them? How had she kept such an important connection secret from him? The questions multiplied in his mind as he studied the girls' faces, searching for clues about the relationship they had shared with Rebecca. Maya reached into her backpack and pulled out a small, worn photograph. "Miss Rebecca gave this to us the last time we saw her. She said if we ever needed help, if we ever needed a family, we should find you and Tommy." The photograph showed Rebecca kneeling between Zoe and Maya in what looked like an art classroom, all three of them smiling at the camera with genuine joy. On the back, in Rebecca's familiar handwriting, were the words, "For my dear girls, Ben and Tommy Carter, Millbrook, PA. Always remember, love makes a family." Ben's hands trembled as he held the photograph, his wife's final message to these children rewriting everything he thought he knew about the last months of her life. The emotional weight of the discovery crashed over Ben like a tidal wave. Rebecca had cared deeply for these girls, deeply enough to give them his contact information and encourage them to think of his family as their family. The realization explained so much about their strange familiarity with his house, their knowledge of his routines, their immediate connection with Tommy. Rebecca had told them about her life, her husband, her son. She had painted a picture of their home that was warm and welcoming enough to make two frightened children travel hundreds of miles to find it. Ben looked at Zoe and Maya, really looked at them, and saw not mysterious intruders, but lost children seeking the love and security their adoptive father's money couldn't provide. His wife had seen something special in these girls, something worth protecting and nurturing. If Rebecca had trusted them with his information, if she had wanted them to find his family, then Ben owed it to her memory to trust them too. "Tell me about Rebecca," Ben said softly, settling more comfortably on the floor beside the girls. "Tell me about the relationship you had with her." For the first time since their arrival, genuine smiles crossed both girls' faces. Maya pulled out a small journal from her backpack and opened it to pages filled with Rebecca's handwriting. "She wrote us letters," Maya explained. "Not just when we were in the volunteer program, but after we were adopted too. She never forgot about us." Zoe leaned closer to share the journal. "She told us about you and Tommy, about how much she loved your little family. She said you were the kindest man she had ever met, and that Tommy was lucky to have you as a father." Ben's throat tightened as he read his wife's words about him, words full of love and admiration that she had apparently never been able to express directly. Reading about himself through Rebecca's eyes was like receiving a final gift from beyond the grave. The journal entries painted a picture of Rebecca's relationship with the girls that was part mentor, part surrogate mother, and entirely devoted. She had followed their progress through the foster system, celebrated their adoption by Alexander Blackwood, and worried about their adjustment to their new life. Her final entries, dated just weeks before her death, expressed concern about their emotional well-being and their struggle to find their place in Blackwood's wealthy but sterile world. The last entry, written just days before the car accident that claimed her life, contained a promise that broke Ben's heart. "I'm going to talk to Ben about bringing you girls to visit this summer. I think you would love our little house, and Tommy would enjoy having big sisters to look up to. It's time for my two families to meet. Rebecca had been planning to introduce the girls to Ben and Tommy. Her death had stolen that opportunity from all of them, leaving the girls with only his contact information and the hope that he would welcome them the way Rebecca had promised he would. Ben closed the journal carefully and handed it back to Maya, his mind reeling with the implications of what he had learned. These children weren't just random runaways who had stumbled onto his doorstep. They were part of Rebecca's extended family, children she had loved and planned to bring into his life. Their arrival, while unexpected and dramatic, was actually the fulfillment of his wife's final wish. The knowledge changed everything about how he viewed their presence and his responsibilities toward them. But it also complicated everything. Detective Reynolds and the Blackwood family were searching for these girls, and Ben was now officially harboring runaways from one of Philadelphia's most powerful families. The smart thing would still be to call the authorities and arrange for their safe return. But looking at their faces, seeing the hope and trust in their eyes, Ben knew he couldn't simply hand them over without understanding more about their situation. "What exactly are you running from?" Ben asked, his voice gentle but serious. "Detective Reynolds said your father is worried about you. If he's been kind to you, if he's provided for you, why are you so afraid to go back?" The girls exchanged another meaningful look before Zoe answered. "Mr. Blackwood isn't cruel, but he doesn't love us. Not really. We're like trophies to him. Proof that he's a good person because he adopted orphans. He shows us off at charity events and talks about his humanitarian efforts, but he doesn't actually want to be our father." Maya nodded in agreement, her voice barely audible. "He's planning to send us to boarding school in Switzerland. He says it's for the best education, but we know he just wants us out of the way. We'll only come home for holidays and summer breaks, and even then, we'll probably spend most of our time with nannies and tutors." The picture they painted was heartbreaking. Two children desperate for real family connections, caught in a system that provided everything except love. Ben felt the weight of an impossible decision settling on his shoulders. On one side were two children who needed protection and genuine care, children his wife had loved and wanted to bring into their family. On the other side was the law, powerful people with unlimited resources and his own responsibility to his son. If he helped the girls avoid returning to their adoptive father, he could face serious legal consequences. If he turned them over to the authorities, he would be betraying not just their trust, but Rebecca's final wishes. The internal conflict was tearing him apart, made worse by the growing attachment he felt to these strange, brilliant, desperately lonely children. In just 2 days, they had brought life and warmth back to his house in ways he hadn't experienced since Rebecca's death. The thought of losing that newfound sense of family was almost unbearable. The decision was taken out of his hands when Tommy burst through the front door, home early from school and full of excitement about spending more time with his new sisters. His enthusiasm was infectious and heartbreaking, a reminder of how much their small family had been missing since Rebecca's death. Tommy had always wanted siblings, and the arrival of Zoe and Maya seemed like an answer to his prayers. Ben watched his son's face light up as he shared stories from school and made plans for afternoon activities, and he realized that any decision he made would affect not just the girls, but Tommy as well. His son had already formed emotional attachments to Zoe and Maya, attachments that would be painful to sever. The complicated web of relationships and responsibilities was becoming more tangled by the hour, with no clear path forward that wouldn't cause someone significant pain. As the afternoon wore on, Ben found himself studying the girls with new eyes, seeing not just the children they were, but the young women they were becoming. Zoe's natural leadership abilities and Maya's artistic talents were obvious, but so was their deep emotional intelligence and their fierce loyalty to each other. These were remarkable children who deserved better than a cold, transactional relationship with a wealthy adoptive father who who saw them as charity cases rather than daughters. Rebecca had recognized their special qualities and had wanted to give them the kind of family environment where they could truly flourish. The weight of that responsibility, the knowledge that his wife had trusted him to care for these children if they ever needed help, finally tipped the scales in Ben's mind. He couldn't solve all their problems, and he couldn't keep them forever, but he could give them a few more days of the family warmth they craved while he figured out a better solution. That evening, after Tommy had gone to bed full of stories about his day with his big sisters, Ben sat down with Zoe and Maya for a serious conversation about their future. "I want you to know that I understand why Rebecca cared about you so much," he began, his voice careful and measured. "You're extraordinary children, and you deserve to be in a family that appreciates how special you are." The girls' faces lit up with hope, but Ben held up a hand to caution them. "However, the situation we're in is complicated. Your adoptive father has reported you missing, and the police are actively searching for you. I can't keep you here indefinitely without becoming an accessory to kidnapping." The hope in their eyes dimmed, replaced by the resigned disappointment of children who had learned not to expect too much from adults. Ben's heart ached as he watched their expressions change, but he forced himself to continue with the difficult conversation they needed to have. "What I can do," Ben continued, "is give you a few more days while I contact some people who might be able to help us find a better solution." Rebecca had friends in social services, lawyers who specialized in family issues. "Maybe there's a way to address your concerns about boarding school. Maybe there's a way to ensure that your voices are heard in decisions about your future." The spark of hope returned to the girls' faces, cautious but genuine. Zoe reached for her sister's hand as she responded. "You would really try to help us, even though it could get you in trouble?" Ben thought about Rebecca, about the love she had felt for these children, about the promise implicit in her final journal entry. "Rebecca wanted you to be part of our family," he said simply. "I can't ignore that, and I can't abandon you when you need help. But we have to be smart about this. We have to find a solution that works for everyone, including your adoptive father." The next morning brought another unexpected visitor, but this time the knock on Ben's door was gentle rather than authoritative. Through the window, he could see a tall man in an expensive but understated suit, standing alone on the porch without the intimidating presence of police backup. The man's posture spoke of wealth and education, but also of weariness and genuine concern. When Ben opened the door, he found himself face to face with someone who could only be Alexander Blackwood. The billionaire tech entrepreneur looked nothing like the cold, distant father figure the girls had described. His eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion and worry, his usually perfect appearance disheveled from what had clearly been sleepless nights spent searching for his missing daughters. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "I think we need to talk." Ben invited Blackwood into his living room, acutely aware that Zoe and Maya were upstairs and probably listening to every word of the conversation. The billionaire sat heavily in Ben's worn armchair, his expensive clothes looking out of place against the modest furnishings, but his exhausted demeanor making him seem surprisingly human. "I know my daughters are here," Blackwood said without preamble. "I'm not here to threaten you or to involve the police. I just want to understand why they ran away and why they came to you specifically." Ben studied the man's face, searching for signs of the cold, calculating personality the girls had described. Instead, he saw a father who was genuinely struggling to understand his children and his own failures in raising them. The disconnect between the girls' perception of their adoptive father and the man sitting in Ben's living room was striking, and suggested that communication problems ran deep in the Blackwood family. "Before we discuss your daughters," Ben said carefully, "I need to understand something. What did you know about their relationship with my wife?" Blackwood's expression shifted to one of confusion, and then recognition. "Rebecca Carter. Yes, she was involved in one of our foundation's programs. a remarkable woman who worked with at-risk youth. The girls spoke of her often after. He paused, his voice catching slightly. After they came to live with me. They were devastated when they learned of her death. I didn't realize there was a connection to you specifically. Ben pulled out the photograph Maya had shown him, the one with Rebecca's message written on the back. Blackwood studied it with growing understanding, his expression softening as he read his late wife's words. She meant a great deal to them, he said quietly. More than I realized, apparently. The conversation that followed was difficult but necessary, with both men slowly understanding how miscommunication and assumptions had created the current crisis. Blackwood explained that the boarding school plan had been suggested by educational consultants who felt the girls needed more structured academic challenges, not because he wanted them out of his life. Ben shared what the girls had told him about feeling like trophies rather than daughters, about their need for genuine emotional connection rather than just material provision. As they talked, a picture emerged of two people who cared about the same children but had completely different ideas about what those children needed. Blackwood's approach was practical and achievement-oriented, focused on providing opportunities and resources. The girls' needs were more emotional and relational, focused on belonging and unconditional acceptance. I never realized they felt that way, Blackwood admitted, his voice heavy with guilt and regret. I thought I was giving them everything they could possibly want. The best schools, the best opportunities, financial security they would never have to worry about. Ben leaned forward, recognizing the pain of a parent who had tried his best but still fallen short. They don't doubt your generosity or your good intentions, Ben said gently. But they need to know they're loved for who they are, not just cared for because it's the right thing to do. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the stairs as Tommy returned from school, followed more cautiously by Zoe and Maya. The girls stopped halfway down the staircase when they saw their adoptive father, their faces a mixture of fear, defiance, and desperate hope. The moment of truth had arrived for the fractured Blackwood family. Girls, Blackwood said softly, rising from his chair with movements that were careful and non-threatening. I've been so worried about you. Are you all right? The simple question, asked with genuine concern rather than anger or accusation, seemed to surprise Zoe and Maya. They had clearly expected recriminations and punishments, not expressions of parental love. Maya was the first to respond, her voice small but honest. We're okay, Dad. We needed to find something that felt like family. The word Dad hung in the air between them, the first time Ben had heard either girl use that title for their adoptive father. Blackwood's eyes filled with tears as he absorbed the meaning behind her words. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to run away to find that. I thought I was being a good father by providing for you, but I realize now that I never learned how to simply love you. The emotional reunion that followed was tentative but genuine, with years of misunderstanding and unspoken needs finally being addressed. Blackwood sat on the stairs beside his daughters, and for the first time since Ben had met them, the girls looked like children rather than refugees. They were still cautious, still protecting themselves against disappointment, but there was a willingness to hope that hadn't been there before. Ben watched from the living room as the family began the difficult work of rebuilding their relationships, and he felt a complex mixture of emotions. He was relieved that the crisis seemed to be resolving itself without legal consequences for anyone involved, but he was also sad at the thought of losing the girls who had brought such life and purpose back to his home. Tommy, characteristically direct in the way of children, voiced what Ben was thinking. Does this mean Zoe and Maya have to leave now? The question sparked a new conversation about what the future would look like for everyone involved. Blackwood had learned something important about his daughter's needs, but changing ingrained patterns of family interaction would take time and effort. The girls had found the family connection they craved, but they couldn't stay with Ben indefinitely without creating impossible complications for everyone involved. The solution, when it came, was proposed by Zoe with the wisdom of someone far older than her 12 years. "What if we had 2 families?" she suggested tentatively. "What if we lived with Dad but spent weekends and holidays here with Ben and Tommy? Rebecca wanted us to be part of this family too, and Tommy wants us to be his sisters." The proposal was unconventional but appealing, offering the girls the emotional security they needed while respecting the legal realities of their adoption by Blackwood. Ben found himself considering the possibilities and challenges of such an arrangement. It would mean regular disruption of his quiet life in Millbrook, but it would also mean the kind of extended family Rebecca had apparently envisioned before her death. Tommy's enthusiastic support for the idea was obvious, and even Blackwood seemed intrigued by the concept of sharing parental responsibilities with someone who clearly understood his daughters in ways he was still learning. "It's not a conventional arrangement," Blackwood admitted. "But then again, our family hasn't been conventional from the beginning. If you're willing, Mr. Carter, I think it might be exactly what the girls need." Ben looked around his living room at the unlikely family group that had assembled there, and he thought about Rebecca's final journal entry about bringing her 2 families together. Perhaps this wasn't how she had planned it, but it was remarkably close to what she had wanted. The practical details of their new arrangement were worked out over the following days, with lawyers and social workers ensuring that everything was legal and properly documented. Blackwood would retain full custody of Zoe and Maya, but Ben would become their legal guardian for weekends and extended visits. The girls would continue their education in Philadelphia, but spend Friday evenings through Sunday nights in Millbrook, plus longer stays during school holidays. It wasn't perfect, but it gave everyone something they needed. The girls got 2 families who loved them in different but complementary ways. Blackwood got help learning how to be a more emotionally connected father. Ben and Tommy got the extended family they had unknowingly been missing. And Rebecca's final wish was honored in spirit, if not in exactly the way she had planned. The arrangement required patience, flexibility, and constant communication. But it also offered something precious. Proof that love could create family bonds stronger than biology or legal documents. 6 months later, the modified family structure had settled into a comfortable rhythm that surprised everyone with how natural it felt. Fridays in the Carter household had become celebration days, with Tommy counting down the hours until his big sisters arrived from Philadelphia. Zoe and Maya had learned to navigate between their 2 very different worlds, the structured, achievement-oriented environment of Blackwood's mansion and the warm, relaxed atmosphere of Ben's modest home. Each environment offered something the other couldn't. Blackwood provided resources, opportunities, and intellectual challenges, while Ben provided emotional security, unconditional acceptance, and the kind of family chaos that made both girls feel like they truly belonged somewhere. The contrast between their 2 homes had taught them to appreciate both, and to see their unusual family structure as an advantage rather than a complication. Alexander Blackwood had proven surprisingly adaptable to his role as a part-time father, using his business skills to coordinate schedules and logistics, while gradually learning the more intuitive aspects of parenting from watching Ben's interactions with all 3 children. The weekends when Zoe and Maya stayed in Philadelphia had become opportunities for father-daughter bonding, with Blackwood making genuine efforts to understand his daughters as individuals rather than as responsibilities to be managed. He had enrolled in family counseling, hired a child psychologist as a consultant, and most importantly, had learned to ask his daughters what they needed instead of assuming he knew what was best for them. The boarding school plan had been quietly abandoned in favor of a local private school that allowed the girls to maintain their weekend family arrangements. Change had been slow but steady, and the improvement in family dynamics was obvious to everyone involved. Ben's own life had been transformed in ways he hadn't expected when 2 mysterious girls first appeared on his doorstep. His house was no longer quiet and empty during weekends and holidays, but filled with laughter, arguments, music, and the organized chaos of a family with teenagers. He had learned to navigate the complexities of raising girls, with their different emotional needs and social pressures, while Tommy had thrived under the attention and guidance of his adored big sisters. The financial strain of supporting a larger family had been eased by Blackwood's insistence on contributing to household expenses and educational costs. But more importantly, Ben had rediscovered his sense of purpose as a father and protector. The grief that had consumed him since Rebecca's death hadn't disappeared, but it had been balanced by new joy and the satisfaction of honoring his wife's memory by caring for the children she had loved. The evening ritual that had emerged as the centerpiece of their family tradition was both simple and profound. Every Sunday night before the girls returned to Philadelphia, the four of them would gather around Ben's kitchen table for what Tommy had dubbed family meeting time. They would share highlights from the weekend, discuss any problems or concerns, and plan for the following week. But the most important part of the ritual came at the end, when Ben would bring out Rebecca's old flashlight and place it in the center of the table. For 5 minutes, they would sit in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts, but connected by their shared presence and their commitment to each other. The flashlight had become a symbol of guidance and continuity, representing Rebecca's ongoing influence on their lives and their promise to honor the family bonds she had helped create. On this particular Sunday evening, as autumn rain drummed against the windows of the little house in Millbrook, the unconventional family sat around their table in their customary moment of silence. Maya was sketching in her art journal, capturing the scene with the observational skills that would serve her well in the art program she planned to enter after high school. Zoe was quietly reviewing her college preparation timeline, her academic achievements having opened doors to opportunities that would have seemed impossible during her earlier years in foster care. Tommy was simply content to be surrounded by the people he loved most, his earlier loneliness a distant memory. Ben watched them all with a mixture of pride, gratitude, and wonder at how dramatically his life had changed since that stormy night, when 2 mysterious girls had knocked on his door. He thought about Rebecca often during these quiet moments, imagining her satisfaction at seeing her 2 families finally united in the way she had always intended. As the silence stretched toward its natural conclusion, Ben reached for the flashlight and clicked it off, officially ending their family time, but not their connections to each other. The girls would return to their father in a few hours, but they would carry the security of this moment with them through the week ahead. In 6 days, they would be back for another weekend of shared meals, homework help, movie nights, and the comfortable domesticity that had become the foundation of their blended family. The arrangement wasn't perfect, and it required constant negotiation and compromise from everyone involved. But it worked because it was built on love rather than obligation, on choice rather than mere circumstance, and on the belief that families could be created through commitment and care rather than just biology or law. Rebecca's final gift to all of them had been the understanding that love, once given freely and unconditionally, could create bonds strong enough to weather any storm.